Have you ever opened your door to a stranger and felt your whole life change? On a bitter Montana night in 1879, a woman stood in the snow with nothing but torn clothes and a plea for scraps and a corner of straw. She had no past she could name, only a scar and silence. Most men would have turned her away. Caleb Hart nearly did. But then his little girl, Clara, looked up at that stranger and whispered a single word that shattered his resolve. "Mama." What would you have done? Trust a nameless woman with a scar that told of violence, or send her back into the storm? Imagine being Caleb, grieving, protective, raising a daughter alone and now faced with a choice that could save them or destroy them. And imagine being Selena, forgotten by her own memory, yet suddenly chosen by a child who saw not fear, but family. This is not just a story of survival. It is a story of second chances, of how love sometimes arrives in the unlikeliest form, carrying no fanfare, but asking everything of us. Stay with us as we step into a world of snow, silence, and the fragile spark of trust that can change everything. Like, share, and subscribe. Your journey into this story begins now. She asked only for scraps and a place out of the wind. But before long, the rancher's little girl called her mother. Montana High Plains, winter of 1879. "I can sleep in the barn," the woman said, her voice thin but steady. "I just need to stay warm. Please." Her cloak hung in tatters, soaked with snow, her lips nearly blue. Dark strands of hair stuck to her cheeks, and the hem of her dress was stiff with ice. Caleb Hart kept his hand on the door latch, the other close to the rifle leaning behind the coat rack. He had expected a stray coyote, maybe a drifter, but not someone half frozen and barely standing. "I don't need charity," she added. "Just a dry corner." Caleb almost closed the door. He didn't take in strangers, not since the winter he buried Margaret. Since then, the world beyond his fence line had proven too merciless to trust. Then came a small voice behind him. Clara, just 4 years old, stood in her nightgown, her bare feet pink against the cold floorboards. She blinked at the figure on the porch. "Mama," she whispered. "She's not your mama." "Clara?" Caleb said gently. Clara frowned. "But she smells like my dream." The woman flinched, but said nothing. Blood marked the edges of her boots, her hands swollen from frost. Yet her posture remained straight, her chin lifted. Caleb's jaw tightened. "There's straw in the far stall of the barn," he said at last. She nodded as if receiving orders, not relief. She didn't thank him. She only stepped inside long enough to warm her trembling fingers near the fire. Her eyes lingered on Clara. Then she turned and disappeared back into the storm. Caleb watched her cross the yard. Steps slow but unbroken. Her tracks vanished quickly beneath drifting snow. He shut the door. Clara was still staring. "Go to bed," Caleb muttered. "She's cold," Clara whispered. "She's not your mother. She didn't say she wasn't." Caleb lifted his daughter into his arms. She curled against him, warm and real, though her eyes wandered back toward the window. "She was in my dream," Clara murmured. "Dreams aren't always true," he said, though something in her words gnawed at him. Later, when Clara finally slept. Caleb returned to the fire. He tossed on 2 more logs, listening to the wind claw at the windows. His thoughts strayed back to the woman's face, not her beauty, but the stubborn way she stood. She hadn't begged. She had only asked to survive. Through the glass, he could barely see the barn's outline. She was out there now, curled into straw, unknown and unclaimed, and Clara still dreamed. By morning, The storm had eased. The woman stepped from the barn with snow on her shoulders, her dress still damp, her hands raw. But she stood tall, as if sleep had mended her. Caleb met her on the porch, coffee in hand. "You're up early," he said, his tone harsher than he meant. "I didn't sleep much," she replied. He studied her, noting how she neither fidgeted nor pleaded. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated, staring at her hands. "I think it's Selina," she said softly. "That's all I remember. Nothing else." She shook her head. "The rest is gone." Amnesia or lies, Caleb couldn't tell. He had seen both before, but when Clara ran across the yard and wrapped her arms around Selina's waist without a flicker of fear, Caleb knew his life had just grown more complicated. Caleb Hart had sworn off strangers years ago, when Margaret was lost to the avalanche. He told himself no more surprises, no more chances taken with outsiders. He and Clara would live quietly, away from town and its questions, away from pain. But now Selina stood in his yard, and his daughter was smiling in a way he hadn't seen since before the snows took her mother. "She's just cold. Clara," he warned, voice heavy, as though he were reminding himself as much as the child. "Let her rest." Clara pressed her face into the folds of Selina's skirt and whispered, "I like her." Selina placed a careful hand on the girl's head, her touch gentle but uncertain, as if she were afraid to claim anything that wasn't hers. "I will earn my keep," she said to Caleb, "if I can stay a little while." He didn't answer, but he didn't send her away either. By midday, Selina had already swept the porch clear of snow, carved a path from barn to well, and washed the breakfast dishes until they gleamed. She moved with a rhythm that felt learned from long practice, not from luxury. She did not chatter. She did not pry. She simply worked, and Clara followed her every step, like a small shadow trailing its source of light. Within 3 nights, it was clear the child would no longer sleep without Selina nearby. Clara refused her supper unless Selina sat close enough to touch her shoulder. When Caleb tried to tuck his daughter into bed alone, Clara wept so hard it hollowed something out inside him. "You sure she hasn't bewitched her?" he muttered under his breath one evening, watching through the doorway as Selina braided Clara's hair by the fire. Clara heard him and lifted her chin. "She's not a witch," she said firmly. "She's just safe. Safe." Caleb didn't know what the woman really was, but he knew his daughter, who used to bolt awake screaming at the sound of winter wind, now sang softly as she dried tin plates at Selina's side. That night, after the lamps had burned low, Uncle Caleb passed the pantry and caught sight of her alone. Selina had loosened her braid, pulling her damp dress near the stove to dry. When she shifted, he saw it just below her collar, a scar, pale and narrow, like a memory cut into her flesh. A bullet wound. Caleb's eyes narrowed. He stepped away quickly, his boot striking the boards too loud in the silence. He lay awake longer than usual, staring at the rafters while the storm clawed the roof. The woman with no past, the child calling her mama, and now the scar that whispered of violence. It all pressed on his chest like weight. He couldn't shake. And yet when he went outside later to check the barn, he carried an extra blanket and a kettle of hot water, though he told himself it was only habit. Days turned to weeks. Snow fell, melted, then fell again. Selina wove herself into the rhythm of the ranch the way a pressed leaf disappears into the pages of an old book. She remembered no details of her life before the storm, but her hands knew chores. Her feet remembered icy trails, and her voice, though soft, carried a steadiness that quieted the air around her. Clara clung to her with fierce devotion, and Caleb watched with an unease that dulled only slowly. Still, he slept with the rifle within reach. But each time he looked through the window and saw Selina lifting firewood or setting Clara on the porch rail to see the sunrise, something in him eased, like a knot loosening in his chest. Then the knock came. It was a clear Tuesday morning, the sky sharp and blue, the air brittle with cold. Caleb had just finished saddling his mare when he saw two riders climbing the ridge. Their coats were dust-colored, hats pulled low. Strangers. He stepped onto the porch as they dismounted. One of them he recognized Mason Pike, the blacksmith's boy, though grown heavier now, his frame as broad as the anvil he worked. The other was wiry, his face weathered into cracks like sun-dried leather. Caleb knew the type before the man spoke. "Morning," the wiry one said, tipping his hat. "Deputy Harlan Graves?" Caleb nodded once, wary. "We heard tell there's a woman staying up here," Graves said. "Came out of nowhere. Scar behind her ear." Caleb folded his arms across his chest. "She's helping out. Watches the girl." The deputy's brow arched. "Might be the one we're looking for. There's a bounty out on a woman fits that description. Armed, dangerous, slips away like a cat in snow." Caleb didn't flinch. "You seen anything off the deputy?" pressed. "A mark on her neck? Maybe Caleb's jaw worked?" His eyes drifted past them, toward the barn where Selina was showing Clara how to split kindling. Clara laughed as the axe bit wood. Selina smiled faintly, though the wind bit at her. "No one like that here," Caleb said flatly. "You sure I am?" Mason Pike squinted at him. "Folks say she's dangerous." Caleb stepped down from the porch, his boots crunching in the frost. "This land's mine," he said evenly. "That means I decide who's dangerous." The words hung in the still air like a cocked rifle. Neither man replied. After a moment, they swung back onto their horses. Their suspicion lingered, but their warning had been delivered. They rode off down the trail, their figures shrinking into the pale horizon. Inside, Selina stood by the sink, drying her hands on a rag. Her eyes met Caleb's when he entered, searching his face. "They were asking about me," she said quietly. Caleb nodded. "And you lied. I saw no reason to tell them otherwise." Her lips pressed tight. "You saw the scar," she said. "I know you did. I saw it." Then why he looked at her for a long moment. "Because a scar doesn't tell me who you are. It only tells me you survived something." Selina sank onto the edge of the bench, hands clasped, her voice trembling. "What if I am dangerous? Caleb? What if I've forgotten what I did?" He knelt beside her, slow and steady as stone, shifting on the mountain. "Then we'll find out. But I won't let someone else write that story for you." For the first time since she'd arrived, her eyes filled with tears, not fear, not sorrow, but something that looked like relief. Clara came running into the room then, snowflake melting in her palm. "Mama," she whispered, holding the tiny crystal out. "It's for you." Selina cupped the fragile flake in her hand. It vanished instantly, but something in her steadied, like frost breaking under sunlight. Even if she didn't remember her past, this moment was real. And for now, that was enough. For the first time since she had appeared at his doorstep, Selina looked like she might cry. It wasn't grief or fear trembling through her, but something closer to release. Clara burst into the room at that moment, her small hands cupping a snowflake already melting away. "Mama," she whispered, offering it up as if it were treasure. "It's for you." Selina took the fragile flake, smiling even as it dissolved against her skin. Something inside her steadied. Whatever her past had been, whatever she could not remember, This moment with Clara felt more real than anything else she had known. And for now, that was enough. That night the wind raged down the pass like a wounded beast, shaking the house and scratching the windows with icy claws. Past midnight, Caleb woke to the sound of muffled crying. He sat upright, his chest pounding. Clary called into the dark. His daughter's voice came soft and broken. "She's gone." Caleb struck a match, light flaring against the frost on the window. Selena's bedroll was empty. Beyond the glass he saw the barn door swinging open, whipped by the storm. "Stay inside," he told Clara firmly. "Don't open the door, no matter what." She nodded, tears on her cheeks, clutching the quilt around her. Caleb pulled on his coat, grabbed the rifle, and stepped into the storm. Snow stung his face, the cold cutting like a blade. On the ground he found what he prayed for: footprints, hurried and half erased by the wind, leading away from the barn and up the ridge. He followed. Each step grew heavier as the slope steepened, the trail narrowing into rock and ice. Pines leaned overhead like old men bent against the cold. His boots crunched on the frozen crust, breath pouring in clouds as he pushed higher, past the trap line, past the spot Margaret once loved to sit in summer. Then he saw her. Selena stood at the bluff's edge, her coat flapping in the wind, hair tangled around her face. The moonlight caught her pale features, streaked with tears. "Selena!" Caleb called, stopping several paces behind. She flinched, but did not turn. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice barely rising above the wind. "You shouldn't either." For a moment, silence stretched, broken only by the howl of the storm. Finally she spoke. "I woke up and couldn't breathe. Everything feels so heavy. What if the deputy was right? What if I've done terrible things and just forgotten? What if I don't deserve this second chance?" Caleb stepped closer, his voice firm. "And what if you didn't? What if you were brave and someone lied?" She turned slightly, just enough for him to see the torment etched in her eyes. "I don't even know my name," she whispered. "You know the kind of person who forgets." His tone softened, the kind who lived through hell and kept going. Her shoulders shook. "I'm tired, Caleb. So tired. Maybe it would be easier for everyone if I just don't say it." He cut in sharply. Her eyes closed, lashes wet. "If I don't know who I am, maybe I don't deserve to be here." Caleb moved forward until he was close enough to reach her. His voice dropped, rough but steady. "Then stay until you do, or until Clara believes you're her mother for good." That broke her. A soft sob escaped her, fragile as breath on glass. Caleb reached out, pulling her gently back from the cliff's edge. She didn't fight. Her body collapsed against him, all bone, cold, and fear. He wrapped her tight in his arms. "I'm not asking you to be perfect," he murmured. "Just stay, that's all." She nodded against his chest. Above them the stars glared hard and bright, watching. For a long while they stood like that, two people broken, yet somehow still whole, before they began the slow walk back down the ridge, step by step, toward firelight and the waiting warmth of home. By morning the storm had softened, leaving sunlight pale and cold across the mountains, long shadows stretching over the drifts. Selena stood at the window, her breath fogging the glass as she looked toward the pass. Something stirred inside her, like a word half remembered, but out of reach. Behind her, Caleb sat at the table repairing a worn saddle strap. Clara hummed at his side, tracing her fingers across a wooden puzzle piece. "I dreamed about paper," Selena said suddenly. Caleb looked up. "Paper." She nodded slowly. "Letters sealed with wax. Maps. hand-drawn, the ink still fresh. I was holding them, guarding them. He said nothing, though his hands stilled on the leather. I don't know why I remembered. She went on. But it felt real, like I'd done it 100 times before. Before the snow, he asked. Yes, long before. She turned to face him. There was also a name. Caleb waited. Langston, she said at last. Selina Langston. Caleb breathed out, the name heavy on his tongue. He nodded once. It sounds right. That afternoon, while searching the attic for Clara's missing mittens, Selina found an old trunk hidden beneath oilcloth. Inside were bundles of yellowed letters tied with red string. Her hands trembled as she untied one and unfolded the page. The writing danced across the paper in slanted ink. To Miss Selina Langston. Thank you for the safe passage. We reached the northern line before dawn. My brother owes you his life. A shiver coursed through her. There were more letters, each filled with words of thanks, names she didn't recognize, mentions of routes and deliveries, places she had never consciously remembered, but now stirred in her chest like ghosts. Caleb leaned over her shoulder, reading quietly. You were a courier, he said. During the war? Selina nodded, her voice low. I think so. I carried messages, slipped between camps, rode at night in disguise. Dangerous work. Why would you do it? Caleb asked. Because it mattered, she said firmly, her fingers tightening around one letter. I believed in a cause. Until one mission went wrong. I remember the cold, the wagon wheels sinking in mud, the sound of shots, someone shouting my name. Then, nothing. Blackness. Someone betrayed you, Caleb said quietly. I think so. Maybe they thought I was dead. Maybe someone wanted me to be. Her jaw clenched as she touched the faint scar on her neck. That's why I have it. Not because I hurt someone, but because someone tried to silence me. I wasn't a criminal. I was a survivor. Caleb met her gaze, holding it steady. Then you're still a survivor, and you're not alone anymore. Selina folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the trunk. She rose slowly, feeling taller, not stronger, but more whole. The pieces of her past had begun to knit together, and for the first time since she had stumbled out of the snow, she felt like she might belong. That evening, Clara fell asleep with her small hand wrapped tight around Selina's braid, as if afraid to let her go. Caleb sat by the fire, the saddle strap forgotten in his lap. You still believe in that cause? He asked softly. Selina looked into the flames. I don't know, but I believe in truth, and I believe in second chances. Caleb nodded. So do I. Outside, the wind eased through the pines. Inside, the fire burned low, carrying warmth into the silence. My brother owes you his life. The words in the old letter made Selina's chest tighten. Her fingers shook as she unfolded more pages, each filled with gratitude, names she did not recognize, and coordinates scrawled in ink, places, deliveries, safe passages. Caleb stood close, reading silently over her shoulder. You were a courier, he said at last. During the war. Selina nodded, her voice low. I think so. I carried messages. Slipped between camps at night, sometimes dressed as someone I wasn't. Dangerous work. But you did it. Her grip tightened around the fragile paper. One mission went wrong. I remember the cold. Wagon wheels sinking in mud. Gunfire in the dark. Someone called my name. Then everything went black. Someone betrayed you, Caleb said. She stared at the scar beneath her collar. I think so. Maybe they thought I was dead. Maybe they wanted me to be. Her jaw hardened. That scar isn't because I harmed anyone. It's because someone tried to erase me." She looked at Caleb, eyes blazing. "I wasn't a criminal. I was a survivor." He met her gaze and gave a single steady nod. "You risked your life for words on paper I believed in a cause," she said, "until it nearly killed me." "Maybe it saved someone, too," Caleb murmured, glancing down at the letter. Selina folded the papers carefully, as if returning them to rest would keep her steadier. When she rose, she did not feel stronger, but she did feel more whole, like pieces of herself had returned, enough to stand tall. That night the fire burned low while Clara slept. Her small hand knotted around Selina's braid. Caleb sat by the hearth, silent for a long time before asking, "You still believe in that cause Selina studied the flames?" "I don't know, but I believe in truth, and in second chances." Caleb gave a slow nod. "So do I." By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving a valley heavy with silence. Trees bowed under snow, and smoke from the chimney curled into a sky so clear it seemed painted. The quiet of the land was broken only when the sound of hooves carried up the road. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, rifle loose over his shoulder. An old man on horseback approached the gate. Despite his years, his posture was straight, his eyes sharp beneath a fur-lined hat. "You Hart," the man called. "That's right." The stranger dismounted with surprising ease, brushing snow from his coat. "Jonas Mercer," he said. "Used to run the Western Pass during the war. Stationed at Silver Creek Ridge." Caleb's brows tightened. "That was over 20 years ago. Still remember the faces that mattered." Jonas looked past him toward the house. "I heard Selina Langston was here. I need to see her." Caleb hesitated. Why Jonas reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather pouch. He handed it over. "She saved my brother's life. He was trapped near Fort Ashbury, shot through the leg, couldn't move. She got him out before the rebels closed in, carried him half a mile uphill in sleet." Caleb opened the pouch. Inside was a folded letter, brittle and stained with age. "She was more than a runner," Jonas said. "She was legend." At that moment, Selina stepped into the doorway, drawn by the voices. She froze when she saw Jonas. His eyes widened as if he had seen a ghost. "Langston," he breathed. "It's really you." Her voice was cautious. "I don't remember you." "That's all right," Jonas said with a smile. "You did enough for us, even if you never remember a thing again." He reached out, took her hand, and pressed it between his. "My brother named his first daughter after you. He still keeps your portrait on his mantle." Selina blinked. "I had a portrait. It was sketched by a Union captain. He said he wanted to remember the woman who rode faster than death." A soft laugh escaped her, disbelief mixing with something like awe. Jonas glanced at Caleb. "There's more. I found a letter recently, tucked in with old maps. It's from your wife." Caleb stiffened. Margaret Jonas nodded and passed him another folded paper. She wrote to Selina. Selina's hands trembled as she opened it. The ink was faded but still clear, the handwriting elegant and strong. "Dearest Selina, your last letter reached me at the edge of winter. The risks you've taken for others humble me. I miss our late-night talks in Lexington before the world burned. If ever you need shelter, come west. My husband is kind, and the land here is wide. You will always have a place by my fire." Tears welled in Selina's eyes. "She wrote this for me?" Caleb swallowed, his voice thick. She must have sent it just before the avalanche took her. For a long moment no one spoke. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then Caleb stepped inside. returning with a small wooden box. He opened it slowly and lifted out a silver medal shaped like a dove, its edges worn smooth with time. "This was hers," he said softly. "Margaret's. She trusted you. And now I do, too." He placed it gently in Selina's palm. Her fingers closed around it, shoulders trembling. "I don't know what I did to deserve this," she whispered. "You survived," Caleb said, "and you came back." The wind shifted outside, brushing snow from the eaves. But inside, something deeper settled, not silence, not fear, but peace. The next morning was still when Selina began packing a few things. The snow had started to soften with the coming thaw, but the air carried unease, like the land itself braced for change. Clouds hung low across the Montana peaks, heavy with the promise of wind and change. The air pressed tight against the land as if holding its breath. Selina stood near the barn with a small satchel slung over her shoulder. Her coat was buttoned up to the throat, but her eyes lingered on the cabin. Within those walls she had found warmth, laughter, and a place at the table. Yet in her heart she told herself it had never truly belonged to her. The creak of the front door broke the stillness. A frantic cry pierced the dawn. Mama Selina spun around. Clara came running barefoot across the wet earth, nightdress fluttering, hair tangled from sleep. Tears streamed down her cheeks, eyes swollen from crying. "Don't go, Mama. Please." The satchel slipped from Selina's hand. She dropped to her knees and caught the girl in her arms. Clara clung to her, desperate, as if letting go would mean losing her forever. "I am not your mother." "Clara," Selina whispered, her voice breaking. "Yes, you are." The child sobbed. "I don't care what anyone says. I picked you. I prayed for you." Selina's heart broke open right there in the dirt. She rocked Clara gently, pressing her face into the girl's hair. Footsteps thudded through the damp ground. Caleb's boots came into view, his face shadowed and unreadable. For a long moment he simply stood, watching them, his jaw tight as though holding back words. Finally, he stepped forward. "Come on, sweetheart," he said, voice steady as a calm river. "Go back inside. I'll talk to her." Clara shook her head, still gripping Selina's coat. Caleb crouched low, meeting his daughter's eyes. "Clara," he said gently, "sometimes love needs a little space to find its way. Can you trust me with that?" The girl sniffled, looked at Selina one last time, and gave the smallest nod. Caleb lifted her into his arms, kissed her damp forehead, and carried her toward the cabin. Selina stayed kneeling in the yard until they vanished inside. She rose, turning back toward her bag, only to find Caleb blocking her path. His hand held something small, wrapped in cloth. "I was going to wait," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "But I think we're out of time for waiting." He unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a silver ring, simple and hand-forged, with a delicate engraving of the ridge that stretched behind their home, a thin line carved like the horizon itself. "I made this for Margaret when I first bought this land," he said quietly. "But she never cared for jewelry. Said the mountain was enough. I've carried it ever since. Didn't know why. Until now." Selina's lips parted, but no sound came. "You came here asking for scraps and a corner to sleep," Caleb continued. "But you gave more than you took. You filled the cracks in this place. In Clara. In me." He dropped to one knee, the ring glinting in his palm. "I want to give you more than warmth," he said softly. "I want to give you a home. As my wife." The wind picked up, lifting strands of her dark hair across her face. She looked at the ring. then at Caleb, then toward the frosted window where Clara's little face pressed against the glass, watching. Tears stung Selina's eyes. "You know who I used to be," she whispered. "You know what I've run from." "I do," Caleb said, his gaze unwavering. "I still don't remember everything. I don't need everything," he answered. "I just need you." Her breath trembled. At last, she reached for his hand. "Yes," she whispered. Caleb slid the ring onto her finger. It did not fit perfectly, but it sat there as if it had been waiting for her all along. A band meant for a woman who would walk through snow, silence, and fire. He stood, pulling her into his arms. They held each other in the fading gray light, the wind swirling around them like a promise. Oh, from the cabin window. Clara pressed her hands against the glass and whispered with a smile. I knew she would say yes. Oh. A year passed since the heavy snows had locked the valley. Seasons turned with quiet determination. Spring brought thaw and rushing streams. Summer covered the high plains with green. By autumn, the pines wore gold and rust. But the most profound change was not the land. It was the little building on the southern ridge. The old storehouse, once sagging and filled with rusted tools, had been remade into a schoolhouse. Children came from miles around, sons and daughters of ranch hands, trappers, and traders. They sat on benches hewn from reclaimed timber, dipped ink pens into jars, and read aloud from weathered books. At the front of the room stood Selina Cross. Her voice carried steady and clear, gentle but never fragile. The children called her Miss Selina, though some whispered Miss Cross with shy admiration. She had traded her saddlebag for a chalkboard, her fear for a purpose. Her dark hair was now pinned neatly, though Caleb still teased it loose by the fire. She wore simple dresses of her own stitching, and always the silver ring engraved with the mountain ridge. It gleamed when the lantern light caught it, a quiet reminder of where her second life had begun. The children came early most mornings, not because they were forced to, but because they wanted to. Some brought apples or pine cones, others just stories. All of them brought noise, and Selina, who once feared the sound of memory, welcomed every bit of it. Each day she carried a tin lunchbox and a worn book up the ridge. Each evening she returned home with chalk dust on her sleeves and tales for the dinner table. Caleb met her at the gate without fail. That spring, he had rebuilt the barn, carving designs into the beams horses, wildflowers, stars. He taught Clara how to shape animals from pine scraps. Her favorite was the fox, crooked and uneven, but proud. She called him Rusty and tucked him into bed each night. Their home was no longer silent. It was filled with the smell of bread and wood smoke, with Clara's laughter, with Caleb's low humming as he worked leather straps, and with Selina's soft singing as she graded lessons by the fire. Selina often marveled at how the life she once thought borrowed had become her own. The land that had seemed harsh and unyielding now breathed with warmth. She had not only found a corner to sleep, but a family, a home, and a future she never dared imagine. And though she still did not remember every detail of the woman she once was, she had chosen the woman she would become. Their home was never silent, though it often carried the hush of peace. It brimmed with the scent of bread cooling on the hearth and wood smoke curling from the chimney. Tools clicked and scraped in Caleb's hands, while Clara's laughter echoed through the hall. The voice of a girl who once spoke only in whispers to the wind. One evening, late in October, Selina tucked Clara beneath her quilt and sat on the edge of the bed. The girl smelled faintly of sawdust and blackberry jam. Her hair longer now, soft against the pillow. "Tell me the dream again," Clara murmured. Selina smiled gently. "The one where you already knew?" The child nodded. "You were cold," Selina said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "Snow was falling. You knocked on a door. It wasn't mine, but I opened it anyway. And you said, 'I knew you would come.'" Clara beamed, pulling the quilt tight to her chin. "I knew you were my mama," she whispered, her eyes fluttering shut. "Even before you did." Selina's throat tightened. She kissed the girl's forehead, lingered for a long moment, then slipped quietly out onto the porch. The stars had begun to scatter across the black sky. Caleb sat on the steps, his knife in one hand, a block of pine in the other. He was shaping another small fox, the shavings curling at his boots. He looked up when she joined him and handed her the rough figure. "You'll need to fix the ears," he said with a half-smile. "I never get them quite right." Selina chuckled softly, turning the carving in her hands. They sat together in silence, shoulder to shoulder, listening to the night move across the mountain. "I saw a new child today," Selina said after a while. "Just riding with her father. Might be old enough by spring." Caleb nodded, his eyes fixed on the stars. "You think you'll have room for one more?" he asked. "I'll make room," she answered without hesitation. "Every child deserves a place to learn, a place where they feel safe." His arm slipped around her shoulders. "You've built one for all of us," he murmured. Selina rested her head against him, her chest rising with steady breath. The wind carried the scent of pine, mingled with the first warning of snow. Below them, the valley, once only filled with silence, now echoed faintly with laughter, the sound of neighbors gathering, families who had begun to stitch their lives into this land. Above them, in the lantern-lit schoolhouse, chalk dust still lingered on the board, waiting for morning, waiting for the next hand to trace letters across its surface, under the guidance of Miss Selina Cross. Out here, in the wide Montana plains, love rarely came with fanfare. It arrived instead with snow on your shoulders, with calloused hands and patient voices, with the courage to open a door to a stranger. Selina had not asked for much when she first came, only scraps, only a corner to sleep. But what she found was more than shelter. She discovered a child's arms wrapping around her as if she'd always been there. She found a rancher's heart, steady and unyielding, and she uncovered a future shaped not by what she had forgotten, but by what she chose: everyday truth, resilience, and a love that grew quiet but firm, like the winds across the mountains. Winter returned soon after. Snow spread across the ridges and drifted along the fence lines. Yet inside the cabin, warmth never faltered. Clara read her lessons aloud by the fire, her voice strong now, filled with confidence. Caleb worked leather at the table, humming softly, and Selina, her hands chalk-stained from the schoolhouse, looked around the room and realized she no longer questioned where she belonged. She was home, sometimes, on late nights. She would still wake with fragments of memory, the rush of hooves, the weight of letters strapped beneath her coat, the sharp crack of gunfire. Ghosts of her old life lingered like shadows on snow, but each time the fear rose, she would feel Clara's small hand searching for hers in sleep, or hear Caleb's steady breathing beside her, and the weight would ease. The past had not vanished, but it no longer defined her. She was not the scar on her neck, nor the letters hidden in an old trunk. She was the woman who opened doors, who built a school, who said yes when the world offered her another chance, and when neighbors gathered in the schoolhouse on cold nights, lanterns glowing. They told stories of the woman who had come out of the storm with no name and found a family. Her name was Selena Cross. The valley spoke it with respect. The children wrote it on their slates in careful letters. And Clara, the girl who first called her Mama, never stopped believing she had been right all along. Because sometimes love chooses you before you even know how to claim it. Life often teaches us that love and belonging do not always come from blood or from certainty, but from the choices we make in the face of doubt. Selena Cross entered Caleb's world with nothing, no name, no possessions, no past she could trust. Yet through patience, quiet courage, and the simple act of staying, she built a home, earned a child's devotion, and found a second chance at life. For those of us in our later years, this story is a gentle reminder that the past does not have to define the rest of our journey. We may carry scars, both visible and hidden, yet those scars can be proof of survival, not shame. What matters is not who we once were, but who we decide to be now. Every season of life offers the chance to open the door for ourselves, for others, or for love we thought had passed us by. Trust, kindness, and forgiveness are not just virtues. They are building blocks of family, whether found or chosen, and it is never too late to believe in second chances. Thank you for sharing your time with us and walking through this story of love, loss, and second chances. If it touched your heart, help us keep these stories alive by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel. Your support means the world, and we can't wait to bring you the next journey.